You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
You are listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home. We now present our program, Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, with your host, Roy Schoeman.
Hi, this is Roy Schoeman, and welcome once again to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism. This show on Radio Maria, perhaps the only show on Radio Maria that celebrates the Jewish roots of the Catholic Church, or seen the other way around, that celebrates the fulfillment, the full realization of all of the promise of Judaism in the Catholic Church and her sacraments. Well, I have a great pleasure today. I have a very old, very long-standing friend who is going to join us in a moment, who is also a very enthusiastic Jewish entrant into the Catholic Church. Her name is Ronda Chervin, and we have been friends for a long time, and my only problem is deciding what I wanted her to talk about on the show. She's got a very, very beautiful and interesting and unusual witness testimony, both in terms of her background. She's also a New York Jew, more of a New York Jew than I am, I guess, because I was from the suburbs, and a very interesting background to her conversion, and a very interesting conversion for which the von Hildebrands, Alice von Hildebrand and Dietrich von Hildebrand, were instrumental in her entry into the Catholic Church, in her coming into the fullness of Judaism in the Catholic Church. And she was also very close to Charlie Rich. If you're a regular listener, you may have remembered some shows that I did on Charlie Rich's life and Charlie Rich's writings and so forth, but Rhonda actually was very close to him personally, and that's going to be the main body, I suppose, of what we talk about. But I wouldn't mind at all hearing something more about Charlie Rich, just in terms of who he was and how he spent his life, which I think will have to come up in the context of talking about some of his writings, and maybe even the von Hildebrands. So anyway, are you there, Rhonda?
Yes, I am. So
okay.
God bless you, Roy.
Okay, well, I think we should kind of like push the New York accent. I can hear you great, and I'm sure everyone else can too.
Oh, okay. I guess you should mention that I'm a philosophy professor and that I've written 80 books.
I forgot. Well, I've written 2 books, so, it's neck and neck, right?
I'm only saying that because the Holy Spirit helped me write all these books. I'm most well known for being on presentations on EWTN, actually. But on to my conversion story, which I love to tell because it reminds me of these miracles that brought me into the church. And so should I just go ahead with that?
The floor is yours.
Okay. So I really have a story that only one person in the whole world probably has a similar story, namely my twin sister. And this is why. My parents of Jewish origin, but atheists, they met in the Communist Party. And we, my sister and I, were conceived at a Communist Party orgy. Then, later, my father became fiercely anti-communist after the Hitler-Stalin Pact. He was totally disillusioned by that, and he became an informer for McCarthy against the communists in America. So who has that background?
Well, that's
Besides that, the miracle of my birth is that my mother had many abortions, and she was about to abort me. She didn't know me was a we and us, my twin sister. She was about to abort us, and my father happened to be a lover of zoology. And he said to her, you know, don't abort the baby. Maybe babies are as cute as little animals. Do you know anyone else with that background?
No. So were you as cute as a puppy?
Well, I hope so, yes. Anyway, so the thing was, we were brought up as total atheists, and the idea was that anyone who was religious was weak or stupid or both, any religion. We didn't even know we were Jewish of origin, and we only found out in this strange way. We were in the public schools in New York, and on Jewish holidays, the Jews were 95% of the school, so they stayed home on Jewish holidays. And I mentioned this to my mother, that there were only 5 of us in this big public school, and she said, well, after all, you are Jewish, you might as well stay home. So I have all these amazing anecdotes, but getting on to my conversion, I was somehow looking for the meaning of life. And when I was in junior high school, we had to write a composition about what do you want to be when you grow up. And I actually wrote, how can I think about what I want to be if I don't know the meaning of life? And that has followed me all my life, that question. So I thought I could find the meaning of life by studying philosophy. But I was studying philosophy with these people who were total skeptics. So instead of the mind being something where you could study love of wisdom and find wisdom, the mind was used just to refute other philosophies, see? So meanwhile, I was looking for love through love affairs, and I wasn't getting anywhere on that score. So by the time I got to graduate school, I couldn't find truth or love, and I said to myself, if I can't find truth or love, why live just to suffer? And this is when these miracles happened. And the first glorious miracle, and I really mean miracle, a miracle that I could prove would be a miracle, not just a nice word. Okay, so the following. It's a Saturday afternoon. My mother never, ever turned the TV on in the afternoon. We only watched TV in the evenings. We would watch the news, and then we would watch I Love Lucy. See? We never watched in the afternoon. In the middle of the afternoon, she turns on the TV, and she calls me and she says, there are a couple of philosophers on the TV. Why don't you watch? Because she knew I was studying philosophy. And these philosophers were Alice von Hildebrand and Dietrich von Hildebrand on a program called The Catholic Hour. So I'm listening to them, and they're talking about truth and love as if they were real. So I wrote them a letter to the TV station, and I said, I've been studying philosophy looking for truth and love. I can't find it. Could you help me? It turned out they lived very near to me in New York City, and I made an appointment to see Alice von Hildebrand. And the minute I saw her, I had this feeling this woman is very important, a wonderful person, okay? And she suggested that I sit in on some classes at Fordham University to see if maybe, to just see. And what amazed me was that since I was told all religious people are weak or stupid, here were these very strong professors. Dietrich von Hildebrand was a philosophical genius, was full of intelligence and strength, even though he was in his 60s then. And so I didn't know what to make of that. But I decided someone suggested maybe you would like to study at Fordham University. And I got my fellowship. I had a fellowship for all of graduate studies at Johns Hopkins. I got that transferred for Fordham University, and I'm studying philosophy. And they can refute skepticism and relativism in 2 sentences, these people. That's Dietrich von Hildebrand. I didn't actually study with Alice, but she was my oldest friend, and she was certainly praying for me. So I still have no idea why. I still had no idea why they believed in God. I wasn't studying what's called natural theology, philosophy of God or anything. So I still didn't know why they believed in God. But they were refugees from Europe, from Hitler's Germany. They were Dietrich was a refugee from there. And the way they would get, because they were fighting Hitler, and the way they would get to see their families in the summer was by running art pilgrimages, sacred art pilgrimages to Europe. And so they asked if I would like to go. And I said, well, I don't like art and I'm not a Catholic, so why should I go? But they said they would give me a scholarship to go, which someone concocted for me out of nowhere, because they thought if I saw the Catholic Church in Europe, I would be very impressed by the beauty of it. So I decided to go because I wanted to see Europe. And I get there, and then these miracles start happening. Here I am, 21 years old. And here I am in France, Paris, France. And I see for the first time Chartres Cathedral, this amazing, huge, beautiful cathedral. And suddenly the line comes into my head of the poet Keats, who said, beauty is truth, truth is beauty. That is all you need to know. And I thought, how could it be so beautiful if all this is idiocy? Religion is idiocy, just a myth. I mean, to me, religion was like believing in dwarfs or something, you know? It was completely meaningless. So I had that thought. And then my godfather-to-be, Baldwin Schwartz, who was a disciple of Dietrich, who was running this pilgrimage, he got me a New Testament in English, and I had never read anything biblical. So I'm reading the New Testament, and I don't really understand it at all. And one night I have this dream, quotes, but it's really a vision. In the dream vision, I see Jesus and Mary at a table, and they're beckoning me to come and sit with them. Okay? So then the then come these big miracles, is I'm in a museum in Florence, Italy, on this art pilgrimage. Now, I wasn't a person who was easily moved by paintings, because my father loved museums, and when we wanted to go and play, he would insist on dragging us to museums. So I actually hated art as a result. So I was just going to be with my professors and to see Europe. So we're in this museum in Florence, and suddenly we see this very austere painting by Da Vinci of Mary. It's like a line drawing. It isn't even a painting, a very famous one. And I look at it, and I realize the meaning of purity suddenly. And I had had this wild life before, and I suddenly think, oh, well, this is the end of this relationship. If I tell my professor and his wife, if I tell them that I'm, had this wild sexual life, they'll totally reject me and I can go home and forget about the whole thing. But instead, they were thrilled. They realized they could convert a Magdalene. So they were even closer after that. So then the biggest miracle was we were in Rome in the Vatican Museum, and there's a famous old tapestry by Raphael, very dusty looking and old, not attractive at all. And it's Jesus and the miraculous catch of fish. And I look at the face of Jesus, and Jesus' face came alive and looked at me. Okay, so that was the biggest miracle. And then right after that, we had in the square of St. Peter's, the Pope blessing the people and talking to the people. And my Baldwin Schwartz, my godfather-to-be, he was a man of 70, about 5'7". He lifted me up into the air so that I could see the face of the Pope, that was Pius XII, blessing the people in wheelchairs. Mm-hmm. And his face had the exact same expression as the face of Jesus in that tapestry. How's that?
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, and well, Roy's conversion story is just as impressive, but this is amazing. Okay, so, but since I wasn't a mystic and I wasn't into art and so on and so forth, then I had to read these famous big things that people read who were interested in becoming Catholics. So I first read C.S. Lewis's Case for Christianity, even though he didn't become a Catholic. That book was the most influential in the 20th century for conversions. And basically the argument is what Jesus says means that he said he was God. Either he's a liar, he's crazy, or it's true. Very simple argument. So then I read Chesterton and people like that. And so by 21, I became a Catholic. And then a few years later, my twin sister became a Catholic. And some years after that, my mother became a Catholic.
Wow.
So it's a glorious, glorious story.
It is. And I guess now you think life has meaning and beauty and truth exist.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Well, I'm just saying this to the audience. I'm very grateful to Rhonda because she was instrumental, among other things, in connecting me with Alice von Hildebrand, who became very instrumental in my life. And as you can all hear, she's a really wonderful person to have as a friend. Maybe what I should do is open up the phone lines. I think maybe some people might have some questions. Would that be okay? We're here with Ronda Chervin, and we've just been privileged to hear her witness testimony, the story of what a nice Jewish girl, or once upon a time not so nice Jewish girl, is doing in the Catholic Church. And before we go down too far another line, Rhonda, I don't like to put you on the spot, but some of your books are about this interesting fellow Charlie Rich, right?
Yes. Okay. So even though my main philosophical mentors were Alice and Dietrich von Hildebrand, who I got a PhD at Fordham University, and then I became a professor and I taught von Hildebrand's philosophy all my life, even so, my spiritual life was hugely influenced by another Jewish convert whose name was Charles Rich. And I want to tell you about him because I've edited different. I wrote a biography of him called "Hungry for Heaven," and I compiled different ideas of Charles Rich into little books. And now, at this time, just recently, I put together excerpts from his books, from his writings, under the title, "Give Me Your Heart, Preparing for Eternal Life." And in that book, I first tell a short version of his life story because it's fascinating. So Charles Rich was born in Hungary, in a little Jewish village just like Fiddler on the Roof. And the rabbis noticed that he was extraordinarily religious because instead of playing games, he liked to stay in the forest to pray alone. So his father went off to America to seek a better life and then sent for the family. And this begins a very dark time in his life because the rabbis in this little village were kind of mystical Jewish rabbis. But in the city, in New York City, the type of legalistic rabbis who he studied with, it didn't appeal to him at all. So eventually he lost his faith and he was very poor. So he worked as a waiter by night and spent 8 hours a day in the New York Public 42nd Street Library, searching world literature, philosophy, and religion to find the God he had lost. Eventually, he fell into total despair and 3 times tried to commit suicide. Each time that failed. So then he suddenly remembered that when he was a kid, he was told never go into a Catholic church because they kill Jews. So he decided, okay, this is how I can die. I'll walk into a Catholic church. Now imagine this. He goes into a Catholic church, and it's during the day. No one else is there. And Jesus speaks to him directly and says, I am God and trust in me. And on his way out of the church, he passes a sign that says, The Mystical Christ in the Modern World, a lecture by a famous Jesuit. So he goes to see this, she goes to this talk, and then he writes to this Jesuit and he says, well, I don't know if you would have time to talk to me, but I've been looking for God, and I had this experience in this church of Jesus telling me that he was God. Would you talk to me? And the Jesuit wrote back, how could I not have time to talk to a man who Jesus is talking to? So anyway, he studied the Catholic Church, and he became a total lay contemplative. What a lay contemplative is someone who, without being a monk or a nun, within the lay state spends his or her time in prayer, most of the time in prayer. And he would do this. He could sit for hours in the chapel and God would speak to him, and he would write down the things that he thought God was saying to him. And this was just when Xerox machines came in. So he would Xerox these thoughts, he'd type them up, Xerox them, and give them out to people. And I became his disciple, and I put his different ideas. I fixed them up because he hadn't gotten through high school even, so I fixed them up. But he was very literate, but just he needed an editor. But then also I put them together into these excerpt books from Charles Rich. So this one about Give Me Your Heart, Preparing for Eternal Life, I put together in my late 70s because I find many, many Catholics in old age are not as prepared as they think they are to contemplate the idea of leaving this world and being forever in heaven with Jesus. So that should be our greatest joy, is the thought of that. But many people have other emotions. So I divided the book into these chapters according to what people might be feeling and what Charlie Rich wrote that could help them, including when you're afraid, agonized, angry, bored, depressed, despairing, discouraged, disgusted, doubtful, exhausted, grief-stricken, guilty, lonely, rebellious, restless, sick or disabled, worried. So those emotions go through the hearts even of people who are very, very devout. Okay? So, and Charles Rich said wonderful, interesting things about these emotions. So I would like to read a few to you, but first, Roy, do you have anything you want to say about it first?
I'm on the edge of my seat. There is a caller on the air, so let's just take that call. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Yes, I have a question for Ms. Chervin.
Yeah.
So I was just listening to what she was saying just a minute ago, and I thought to myself about Catholics perhaps not really having the faith that they think they have, and that's something that I've wrestled with, because I think I believe, and I think I'm a Christian, and I want to be, but there's this doubt I have deep inside. I wonder if I really do believe. And I say the rosary every day, but then I think about the snowflakes falling into hell, the vision of Fatima, and I think, am I going to be one of those snowflakes or those leaves falling into hell? And because I don't really, I don't know if I really believe.
Okay, I have a very cute answer for you about hell. I like to say, even though I have all these faults, okay, not mortal sins now in my life, but faults of all kinds, just the same, if anyone who tries as hard as I do can't get into purgatory, no one's going to be there. See, I'm not a saint. I can't think that I'd go right to heaven, but a person who goes to Mass regularly, who reads Scripture, who prays the Rosary, don't you think that we would make purgatory? Otherwise, 3/4 of humanity would be in hell.
I hope so, but then sometimes I think if I were faced with some of the things that other people are faced with, would I be able to hold fast to my faith in Christ? Would I be able to, or is it just something like, is it just okay, because I haven't been tested? Okay, what I do with those thoughts, I know what you're talking about. What I think you need to do with those thoughts is you need to immediately what's called rebuke the evil spirit of doubt, the evil spirit of fear, the evil spirit. Jesus says over and over again, do not be afraid. So this is a typical example of being anxious about something that you can't control, but we need to rebuke that spirit in prayer every time it comes up, even if it's 12 times a day. See? Okay. That's my quick answer, but you might like to look up my books, because I have many books that deal with similar questions. The spelling is Ronda, R-O-N-D-A, Chervin, C-H-E-R-V-I-N. So you can look up books of Ronda Chervin, and you'll find a lot of them that deal with similar topics. Okay, I will do that. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, bye.
Okay,
You had another question.
Well, I've got they're coming in. I don't know if people are too shy to get on the phone line or whatever, but we may have more live callers. But in the meantime, the first question we got was whether any music on that original trip to Europe was a part of your, what influenced you towards beauty and God.
Not so much me, but my twin sister who became a Catholic. She was tremendously influenced by this piece, Verdi's Requiem. Verdi is the famous composer of operas, but he wrote a requiem, and she loved that piece, and she played it over and over again, and that greatly influenced her.
Wow. Okay. The questions have been pouring in, so I have two more questions. I know this is a question that's very dear to your heart. How can the Jewish Catholic community go about evangelizing other Jews?
Oh, okay.
I remember you suggested sandwich boards at one point.
One of the main answers that I have to that is, instead of calling yourself a Catholic all the time, I call myself the Hebrew Catholic. So they know I haven't renounced my Jewish identity, but I'm a Catholic, see? So always speaking to yourself as a Hebrew Catholic can be a help with that. Then also just telling your story is very, very important. And also having answers to questions that people likely are going to ask. So, for instance, people will say, well, Catholics are anti-Semites. We know that. Look at the Inquisition, So before I became a Catholic, someone gave me a huge history book about the Inquisition, in which I was able to see that it was mainly political rather than religious in this way, that there were Jews who pretended to become Catholic because they thought they'd get ahead if they became Catholic, but remained Jews and were actually in league with the Muslims who had taken over half of Spain. So the Inquisition was to see if people who said they were Catholic, Jews who said they were Catholic, were really Catholic, or that they were practicing Judaism in their homes, and so on and so forth. So many things like that. For instance, anti-Semitism in, you see it in Fiddler on the Roof. Okay, Good Friday, the Christians, they just hear about how the quotes, the Jews killed Jesus. They don't even think about the fact that Mary was a Jew, that Jesus was a Jew, that the disciples were Jews. They just think, oh, if I run out and attack this Jew, I can take the loot out of their stores. It was like a riot. See?
Yeah.
So the motives of all these things, they're not as simple as we think in the caricature. And then there are these wonderful things like, if you study how Pius XII had saved all these Jews, and John the 23rd saved all these Jews, and so on and so forth. So if you bring in all those sort of things, if you study up on it, so you can get all these answers. If you go to the Association of Hebrew Catholics, you can find a lot of this literature.
Yeah. Okay. I actually, that's very good. I actually have another approach. I'm not sure it's really relevant, which is that basically my answer is either the sacraments are real or they aren't. And if they are real, then there's no other game in town. I mean, you want God, you go to the Catholic Church. And if they're not real, then, they're all fools. So I try to kind of do an end run around the human side of the equation and leave it on the divine side of the equation. But anyway, we have another caller, so maybe that caller could introduce themselves, and I hear they have a question or something. So if you're on the line, go ahead.
Can you hear me, Roy and Rhonda?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for taking my call. Rhonda, when you talked about beauty, I immediately thought of Father Thomas Dubay. He had a series on EWTN years ago on beauty. It was tremendous. Even Bishop Barron talks about beauty being one of the proofs of the existence of God. And I was just wondering, do you know anything about Father Thomas Dubay and his program? I know he had a book on beauty. And Roy, even you're seeing the Blessed Mother, and I'm sure you were very overcome and overwhelmed by her beauty. It may have caused an immediate conversion in you. Rhonda, do you know Father Thomas Dubay?
Well, I remember him vaguely. I'm 86 years old. All the books I read in the past are a blur. So I could just say beauty plays an enormous part in my faith. It didn't in my conversion of music so much, but later I came to love great classical Christian pieces, especially those of Bach, who even though he was not a Catholic, his music is very, very Catholic in all kinds of ways. And I just love beautiful Gregorian chant, and all beautiful, beautiful music plays a huge role in my life. And just the beauty. What I like to say to people, as a matter of fact, people who are afraid of death, and they say, anyway, heaven sounds boring, just these people singing. I say, okay, think of the moment when you experienced the greatest joy ever in your life. For instance, when you saw your baby's face for the first time, or when you were looking at the ocean, or you climbed this mountain and you reached the top. Now multiply it by infinity. That's how beautiful heaven will be. So why would it be boring?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I know the caller asked me, so I feel justified in butting in a little bit. You talk about the beauty of the Blessed Virgin Mary when I thought I saw her, and that's absolutely true. But as I usually say when I give my witness testimony, more overwhelming than her visual beauty was the beauty of her voice. And I do think, the way I in fact describe her voice is her voice was made up out of that which makes music. And I think, at least in my case, music had a more profound, immediate kind of conversion effect than visual art. And I remember I went to hear Mahler's Second Symphony, which I believe is called the Resurrection Symphony. And when I left the concert hall, I said to myself, oh, that's what I am. I'm a Christian. It had just carried me through its theology in the music. So,
well, Mahler actually was a Jewish convert.
Yes, I know. I know. I think that's why, in some sense.
For those who are not familiar with him, that's Gustav Mahler, Mahler, and he wrote a fantastic Eighth Symphony, which is just fantastic about eternity.
Yeah, and the second one is the Resurrection, and I better stop there because I'm a bit of a Mahler fanatic, but I'll just stop there. He was a very genuine, intense Catholic convert, even though people don't like to admit that. The Jewish community does not like to admit that Jews become passionate Catholics because of true conversions. They tend to dismiss it as doing it for social advancement or something. And that was said of Mahler because, of course, the only alternative is that the stuff's real and Jesus really is who he said he was. So, but the proof is that the girl that he was giving piano lessons to, who became his wife, wrote her mother saying, "Isn't it odd that I should be catechized by a Jew?" and essentially brought to the faith by a Jew. So he definitely was a real convert. I knew I'd go too far if I started talking about Mahler. Anyway, I don't know if the caller's still there, but
I'm still there. It's wonderful, very, very wonderful. I'm going to look him up. For sure.
Oh, he's out of this world, and I think that one of the reasons he had such a strong conversion effect on me is precisely because his music kind of obviously comes from a Jewish soul, if there's such a thing as a Jewish soul, but it like totally embraces Christ. So it's kind of like a bridge from, it's a fulfilled Jew. It's fulfilled Jewish music, so to speak.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, and thank you for calling. I'd better give it back to Rhonda because we only have a few more minutes, and you haven't had a chance to talk about some of the wisdom of Charlie Rich.
Oh dear, well, I feel bad about that. I feel actually, Roy, I think we should do another program just on that book because I think it's so wonderful. So I had all these quotes I was going to give from the book, but what do you think? But should I give some tidbits now?
Give a little preview of coming attractions.
Oh, okay. And when you're despairing, Charles wrote this. If you have lost all consolation, there remains the one hope to have God in the next world, to hope to have after death what you do not have here. So someone is despairing, this is me now, someone is despairing thinking, my marriage didn't work, my kids have rejected me, all this bad stuff. But if you think in eternity, if you pray all those people, if you forgive everyone and you pray them into eternity, you're going to be together forever. And then that consoles you greatly. So we don't meditate enough on what heaven is going to be like. Now here he says, God always comes to your rescue, but before he comes to your rescue, you have to be convinced that only God can help you, like the disciples in the storm. See, as long as you're thinking, okay, I have this terrible problem, I feel despair, but here's the 10 things I'm going to frantically do to improve my life, doesn't help all those things. What helps is you have to just say, God, you save me the way you want to save me. See?
It's beautiful. His
writings are very, very practical.
They sound very down to earth.
There is nothing on earth which God cannot use to make us happy and give us peace. No circumstances can arise in our life in which this cannot be done. For being almighty and omnipotent, he can do the impossible. Where men see a limit, God beholds the unbounded, the uncircumscribed, and that which to him offers no obstruction. There are no obstacles for Christ, but only for men. And so to him we should turn and not to them when we wish to have something done, something which requires unlimited scope. St. Paul says, I can do all things in him who strengthens me. Okay.
Yeah.
Then on grief, which many of us experience grief because, people have died who we love. And he says, God has given us two different modes of communication, one with the living, one with the dead. The dead speak to us and we to them, but we do so in the depths of our being, which God alone is able to penetrate. There is a certain deep-seated satisfaction whenever we think in a holy way of those who have already left this life. And he says, no one ever came to Christ unless his heart was broken. So he says very interesting things like that. One of them that isn't in this book, which I just love because it's so funny, is my husband, who was an Orthodox Jew who became a left-wing atheist in his teen years and then was trying to find Christ. And he knew Charlie. And so he said, after years of searching to see if he wanted to become a Catholic, he said to Charlie Rich once, well, Charlie, after all, why should I become a Catholic? And I was thinking Charlie would say some beautiful thing to him. And this is how Charlie answered, because Charlie came from the same pushcart peddler background of New York City. He said to him, become a Catholic because you get more.
Amen.
So I thought that was just hilarious. So he'd come out with these totally unexpected types of things. Here's something. What is death but the best friend any human being is able to have, since by means of it he's freed from the many miseries of his life and ushered into the joys of the world to come. It is a delusion to dread that which we should love more than any other thing. See, so it's so thought-provoking, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The death is...
So then he says, as we advance in years, people leave us, and that is a blessing since we have more time to be with God. His or her soul is mine, not yours, God says to those he takes by means of a holy and happy death. We should in no way complain, and that those we love go back to God from whom they came. See? So this book, I hope that some of you will get hold of this book. It's Charles Rich, R-I-C-H, Give Me Your Heart, Preparing for Eternal Life.
Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but at one point in time, some of your books were online, I believe, as PDFs for free. Is that still the case?
Yes. Yes, if you go to Books of Ronda Chervin, En route Books and Media, you have to put En route Books and Media. That's E-N, capital E-N, then R-O-U-T-E, Books and Media. He has, my recent publisher has a whole bunch that he sends free just for postage. And also some you can get as e-books, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, because well, anyway, you have 80 books. I'm sure there's a lot of treasure in there. We may have time.
Yes, and you haven't read all of them, Roy. You haven't read all of them. So any that you want, the publisher will send them to you free, and then you can interview me about them.
Okay, that's a good deal. That's a good deal. But I've read a number of them. I mean, not a majority, I must admit. I haven't read 40 plus, but it definitely was my introduction to Charlie Rich, and a lot of other stuff also. We had one caller who called in with a question but hung up before we got to her, which may be the last question we have time for. What is your personal relationship with the Blessed Virgin Mary?
Oh, I love Mary so much. Oh, okay. I always loved Mary, but I had a very important miraculous experience with her in this way. Some people in the parish who are part of the Blue Army of Our Lady of Fatima bring around the pilgrim statue, copies of the original statue. They bring these sculptures around to people's houses with a whole bunch of prayers to say. So they brought the statue to my house, and it was a busy day, and I certainly didn't want to pray. There's a huge booklet of prayers they were going to pray before they left me. So I wasn't in a good mood, particularly, and I just muttered these prayers. Well, as soon as I said this prayer, Mary, take my heart and give me your heart, I experienced this delicious peace that lasted for 2 years.
Wow.
And I started to have wonderful visions of the Trinity, visions of all kinds, that it ushered me into the whole contemplative life of the church.
Wow. Thank you very much. And we definitely have to continue it. But I hope that everyone digested that last experience of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And with that, I'm going to have to say thank you and goodbye to Rhonda, and thank you and goodbye to our audience. And you've been listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria with me, your host, Roy Schoeman. We've had this wonderful guest, Ronda Chervin, Ronda, new word, Chervin. And if you Google her, you can find her books. And I hope to have the great pleasure of having her on again very soon. And with that, it's time to say goodbye for now.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.